We're so excited to be here today.
We are as surprised as all of you are to see us here.
We really are.
And before you ask, no, we aren't like famous celebrities or anything, though you could probably find one around here if you looked hard enough.
We met a
We
bunch
saw,
today.
yeah, she was awesome. You see her around, say hi.
Yeah, we met Zara Larson. What we are is a group of teenagers who are super passionate about solving the world's biggest problems and are speaking on stage here at Websummit, the absolute coolest conference in the world, I will not lie. So lucky to be here in Lisbon, and all of that aside, so grateful that all of you came out today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is way better than being in cold, rainy Canada.
No offense to Canada, obviously, none intended.
We love Canada, but it's great to be here.
True. One of the biggest reasons why we, a bunch of teenagers, are on stage here talking to you guys is in part because of this lovely organization called the Knowledge Society, or TKS for short. Think a human accelerator program for a bunch of high school students who want to change the world, solve the world's biggest problems using exponentially growing technology. You have TKS. I, for example, created a lot of things with space technology and artificial intelligence, specifically using convolutional neural networks to create an exoplanet detector. I also did some work at the University of Toronto on some gene editing. So, in short, I'm just a science nerd.
Yeah, today's also Taira's birthday. She's only 17 and doing all this cool space stuff. Yeah, Taira's really cool. My name is Anupra, and a lot of my past work was actually in the space of understanding the biology behind how we age, which is a little ironic because I'm only 17 too. I haven't really aged much myself yet, but I actually have a startup in the space of aging called Bioteen, where we're trying to build a better way to detect proteins related to age-related diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. You can kind of think of it as like a pregnancy test, but instead of pregnancy, it's measuring proteins related to aging.
Very cool stuff.
Yeah, and I'm Riya. Like I said, I'm super excited to be here. I'm the oldest out of the bunch. I'm 18, so I like to think of myself as the mom of this group. But I love anything that's related to sustainability and discrimination. I've done a lot of research into the intersection of how we can create sustainable communities more diverse. And I'm also a first-year student at the University of Toronto. I've also done a lot of research into conflict zones in developing countries and how we can create more equitable spaces for different women to participate in politics. So really excited to be here.
Woo! Fun stuff. Now, let me address the elephant in the room, though. It's true. It's a scandal. None of us have actually worked on anything remotely environmental science related, or energy related for that matter. And you know what? The thing is, all of us think that while that might be true, we think that we don't necessarily need to have experience in each of those spaces to make an impact in them. And that's because most people who create disruptive impacts are people who aren't necessarily part of the industry. They weren't incumbents, they were outsiders. You know, companies like Microsoft, SpaceX, and Netflix are like household names at this point. You think of them and you think, oh wow, that's what I want my startup to be like, you know? Most people in startups would probably agree. These were companies that were innovative, they were disruptive, and they were very creative, never before seen concepts. Like Microsoft popularized the use of personal computers. SpaceX did a lot of work in completely changing the way we see rockets as like single use, so they don't go like kaboom when they land back on Earth. And Netflix changed the game of subscription and created an entire subscription empire to watch your favorite media on demand. You might be wondering why I'm talking about this, but there's a trend between each of these companies, you know? Each of these companies were incredibly disruptive. They did things, they had impacts that were big, never before seen, and they grew very big, and no one saw them coming. If I was someone in media before Netflix, I would have thought to myself, hey, I want to watch shows when I want to do them. I want to watch them on demand. I would have just asked my theater to open up more time slots to watch my favorite movies. I wouldn't have thought of making a subscription empire. You can't see that coming. And the best part, in my opinion, is the fact that each of these people, they weren't incumbents. They were people from outside their industry. Let me take your favorite example, my generation's favorite example, Elon Musk. He was at PayPal at first, and then he went into electric vehicles and created a whole storm around Tesla. And then after that, he went to SpaceX and did literal rocket science. Literal rocket science. I'm not even joking. The best part is, this is true for anyone who's trying to disrupt an industry. All people who've made these disruptive changes have been primarily outsiders. And that's kind of lovely. When each of us realized this, we thought to ourselves, look, if all of these super cool people who made very interesting impacts could do all of this change without actually being a part of these industries, what's stopping us? It's true, we may not be PhDs in environmental science or something related to that, but we think that that gives us a bit of a new perspective onto solving this problem. And I think if there's any proof of that, each of us being on stage here today proves that well enough. The one thing I want to talk to you about is the fact that climate tech, climate change, is an area that hasn't been disrupted yet, like media or personal computers or space for that matter. It's something that we haven't touched. Right now, a majority of the impacts that are being made are by people who are incumbents, our experts, our political scientists, people who are working deep in environmental problems. And they're making slow and gradual change over time, very linear progress. And that's lovely, it's great, but it's slow. We have things like COP26 because of it. I know in places like India, solar cells are actually 3 times cheaper to use than things like gasoline or different types of energy. And that's great. And I know people just love sustainability so much more now. I mean, this entire conference is proof of that. So my question is, why is it getting worse? Like, exponentially worse? What happened? We're making all these changes. We have these conferences, we have this tech, but still, we aren't moving the needle. So what's stopping us? A lot of people think it's because we're beyond the point of no return. We're far past it, in fact. But I think that that's only true if we keep up our progress right now. Linear progress. See, as climate change gets worse over time, we have a responsibility to make sure that our technology gets exponentially better at solving it. Right now, we're kind of in a tortoise in the hare type situation. You've probably heard of the story. The tortoise goes slow and steady, but it still wins the race because the hare is inconsistent in the race, even though it's fast. Right now, our incumbents in the industry are like tortoises. They're going slow and steady, and they're making progress. But climate change isn't a hare. It's going exponentially fast, and we can't catch up with it right now. So we have a responsibility to prove that and solve it. So the thing that's stopping us from making this match even and going at the same exponential rate is because most of the brilliant people working in the industry right now are incumbents. Our political scientists, our researchers, our PhDs, and they're brilliant people. But their perspective is to bring these new technologies to scale. They have things like solar cells, which are incredible, but these actions aren't disruptive. Carbon dioxide stays in our atmosphere for over 1,000 years. So that means that switching to green technologies is not going to solve all of these problems that we have if our carbon dioxide emissions still stay in the atmosphere. And that's the sad truth. I like to think of it like this. Think of the Earth as a very angry landlord who's been demanding that you pay rent month after month, but you don't kind of want to. Suddenly, the Earth puts their foot down and it's like, look, if you don't pay your rent this month, I'm going to kick you out of your house. And because the Earth is our house, we can't really afford to get kicked out of it. We don't really have anywhere to go. And it turns out that in order to stay inside our house, inside the Earth, we need to be extracting 10 gigatons of CO2 every year by 2050 in order to have just a habitable planet. And because myself, Riya, and Anupra are on team, let's not get kicked out of the planet, we just decided to look into the area of carbon capture and turning carbon into something useful, therefore leading to us creating our project, Captus.
Thank you. Okay, awesome. So who here, double-clicking on this idea of carbon capture like Taira was talking about, who here has heard the term direct air capture before? Yeah? Okay. For those of you who don't know, I promise you that you've heard of the term direct air capture before. In fact, I bet you $1 million, and I say this very lightly because I'm in a shit ton of student debt right now, so I can't really afford that. But it's in fact a tree. Yes, I know, it's not that glamorous, but these guys have been the OG carbon capture machines for thousands of years. Everyone knows how they work. They basically use energy from sunlight, they take in carbon dioxide, and they expel oxygen back into the atmosphere. You know, as a planet, we've always been thinking about how can we grow more trees to increase sustainability. Every single conversation I have with a person about climate change, they always talk about, well, let's just plant more trees to increase our Earth lifespan. And you know, it's not necessarily an efficient solution because we're investing resources in something that's not really making huge progress. For example, when everyone used to ride horses, you know, when horses were a thing, everyone was asking, how can we make a faster horse? How could we build faster horses? And instead, Henry Ford went and he, you know, obviously built a car. He completely revolutionized a way that the world interacts with each other, that the world connects with each other. And the interesting thing about this is that it's this battle between incremental growth versus exponential progress. Planting trees is exactly like trying to make a faster horse. Again, you're investing and funding the same solution that's not really going anywhere, and it's not really making efficient progress. Even if we were to plant forests full of trees, we wouldn't actually see carbon retention until at least 10 years after they've been planted. That's a long time, and nobody wants to wait until then. So instead of thinking about how can we plant more trees, or in this case, how can we build a faster horse, let's start thinking about what could be our car in this situation, like Henry Ford did. What could be the thing that takes us from incremental growth to exponential progress? And that is the carbon capture, the direct air capture machine. This is our car, the Ferrari of carbon capture, if you will. If we massively roll out on direct air capture resources, we could actually cut the cost of global warming from 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Now, if you don't know how a direct air capture plant works, basically, it takes in CO2, carbon dioxide, as an input. A series of chemical reactions take place within the machine. And through this machine, we expel oxygen back into the atmosphere, but it basically filters through clean, compressed air. You can kind of think of it like a vacuum for carbon dioxide. And the thing is that there's dangerous levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. There's almost 4,000 tons of this stuff that's clouding our atmosphere per a year. If, instead of using a direct air capture machine, we were to, let's say, plant trees to fix the solution, we would actually need to plant 20 million trees. 20 million. And I don't think anyone's going to quit their day job to do that. It's not very practical. I don't really want to, but if you want to, you go ahead. Instead, if we were to use a direct air capture machine, we would not only be able to filter through 10 times the amount of carbon that trees do, but also be able to do it with a much smaller land footprint and at a much faster pace. The issue is, though, that direct air capture is not getting the same amount of investment and attention as other innovations in the space. We hear about self-driving cars, self-flying cars, quantum computing, AI, these big buzzwords that we're hearing in the industry. They're getting so much more investment than something that can completely revolutionize climate change. I mean, yes, we do have billionaires like Elon Musk who are investing in climate change solutions, like groups like X Prize, for example. We even have Jeff Bezos, who is setting up the Amazon Climate Pledge Fund. And we all appreciate everyone's inclusivity when it comes to climate change, but it's just not enough. Again, we are past the point of no return. We cannot just think about how can we prevent emissions from our atmosphere, but actually, how can we reduce them at the megaton scale? So for example, if you take a look at this graph here, these are the amount of companies that are investing in green and renewable energy versus carbon capture. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely seeing something wrong with this. It's not enough to have all these resources being concentrated in green energy. In fact, there's less than 20 full-scale projects in direct air capture totally in our planet, out of the billions of people and the brilliant minds that we have. Again, we need to be able to do more. And the interesting thing is, like I was talking about earlier, direct air capture, it's not because we don't care about climate change. I mean, everyone cares about climate change, right? But it's really expensive to capture carbon. Direct air capture machines are very, very similar to Ferraris in more ways than one, or cars in more ways than one. They're not just pretty and shiny and nice to look at, but they're also really expensive. It actually costs about $100 to $600 just to capture 1 ton of carbon. To put this in perspective, we would need at least $1 trillion to reach our 10 gigaton goal. And climate financing in 2017 was only $510 to $530 billion. Again, we need to do more, and this is compared to other innovations in the space. Carbon dioxide is actually a very dilute substance in our atmosphere, so it is extremely hard to kind of filter through and extract that. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack in the middle of nowhere in a black hole. To do this whole carbon capture process, we need very high energy intensive systems. And as I'm sure all of you have assumed, high energy intensive systems means that we need high material costs. So a lot of incumbents, like Taira was talking about earlier in the space, scientists and researchers are all looking into how can we reduce the cost of materials? How can we minimize material costs of carbon dioxide or direct air capture machines, or reduce the energy requirements of them? And again, they're not really making that much progress with this. Not many people have cracked the code or hit the nail on the head of how to reduce material costs by a megaton. So even if we were to be able to do that, the whole carbon capture process would still cost billions of dollars. Instead, here at Captis, we're thinking about how can we actually make a profit out of direct air capture? How can we not necessarily minimize the cost of materials for direct air capture machines, but actually make a profit off of carbon dioxide? And there is some talk about this in the climate change industry right now, but we need to be talking about it and pushing forth more projects in this area as well. So again, how can we make DAC profitable? How can we not only look at carbon as more of a resource, as more of a thing that we waste, but actually use it as a resource? Because right now, carbon dioxide, whenever it's captured, it's actually buried underground. And essentially, there's no economic incentive for this. I mean, companies, governmental leaders are not going to want to invest in this stuff because they're not making a net return. They're not making any profit. So instead, we are thinking about how can we actually not let that carbon go to waste and maximize the profit that we make of it. In fact, over 90% of the carbon dioxide that's buried underground lasts for 10,000 years. 10,000 years of missed opportunities of allowing direct air capture and carbon dioxide to be a major facet of our market and global economies. For so long, we've viewed carbon dioxide as the enemy, as something that we have to just get rid of. It can hurt us. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We could actually think about it in the way that it could help us, only if we choose to look at it that way. We have a method now that we could maximize the profit off of direct air capture. We could actually make a profit off of carbon dioxide instead of just letting it go to waste. We can not only make incremental progress, but exponential change.
Yeah, so like Riya said, we wanted to start thinking outside of this carbon capture box and about how we could use CO2 to create valuable materials, which is what led us to create Kaptis, our project where we're trying to turn already captured CO2 from direct air capture into graphene. This graphene can be sold to electronics manufacturers and not just create a profit, but cover the cost of the carbon capture. Now, we've been working on this for a few months now. We've talked to a few professors about our project, and though we did get quite a bit of feedback, the general consensus from these professors at places like the University of British Columbia and the University of Massachusetts was, this idea sounds interesting. Which is really surprising to us because, I mean, we've only been working on this for a little bit of time. We were expecting them to be like, oh, this wouldn't work. Oh, this probably wouldn't be economical enough. But it just goes to show how much outsider disruptor perspectives can actually make an impact. So just going a bit more into graphene, if you haven't heard of it before, you can pretty much think about it as the C in CO2. It's solid carbon, and it's a material that can be used in all kinds of different technologies, from batteries, solar panels, to computer chips. It has properties that are way better than the existing materials that you normally think of in these technologies, like silicon and copper, when it comes to transporting electricity. But it still isn't being used to its full potential right now. So this got us thinking, why haven't we graphenified everything yet? Why aren't we calling Silicon Valley Graphene Valley already? Why aren't we using this in all these different technologies? What we realized is, the main thing is we just don't have a very good way to manufacture it. Manufacturing graphene kind of sucks right now. It uses really high amounts of energy, 1,000-degree heat, which is why it's so expensive compared to other materials like copper. So what Captus is pretty much trying to do is use CO2 to make this process way more affordable. we're actually using something called plasmonic nanostructures, which allow us to use light instead of heat to create this reaction. We created a bit of a demo of what this process looks like. These are metal spheres at a very small scale that, under light, create very strong electric fields. This allows the reaction of CO2 to graphene to occur. This would be scaled up. And the cool thing about this process is that it can happen entirely at room temperature and without any other toxic chemicals. So, based on our predictions, we actually think we may be able to reduce the cost of graphene by over 5 times compared to what it is now, while still covering the cost of DAC and creating a carbon negative process, since graphene can lock the carbon dioxide away from the air. So we still have a long way to go. We're right now getting feedback from professors, like I said, and we're actually a finalist in this global competition called Social Shifters. But what we're hoping to do is, by converting CO2 to graphene, improving the process we use to create graphene and the process we use to reverse climate change, we're kind of hoping to save 2 birds with 1 carbon-dense stone. At the end of the day, though, when you look at disruptors that are coming in and changing an industry, kind of like what we're trying to do, what most of them have in common, like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, is that they were able to create inflection points. They were able to build something that completely changed the progress of an industry, went from incremental to exponential impact, and changed the way we live. Like Microsoft throwing us into a new world of personal computers, any information you could ever want at your fingertips. Or Netflix giving you entertainment at your fingertips, where you can watch Squid Game wherever you want. Hopefully not during this talk, though. What we hope to be is that inflection point when it comes to carbon reduction and reducing climate change. And by doing that, we hope to actually start making a dent into this gigaton-sized problem. So that's us. It's really great to be here. Thanks so much for listening. Come find us after we left the chat. Thank you.
Come and say hi.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay.